All right, so McLaren and Mercedes have the same power unit, and what we're seeing now is that Mercedes' main advantage is that it's able to have a wrap around its engine, and with its software, it has a lot of powerful deployment. It's very peaky in the front, and has a lot of straight line speed, and has good aerodynamics with the X and the Z modes for deployment. But what we're seeing with McLaren is the other way around. McLaren has the powerful unit, and therefore it has a pretty good straight line speed, but not as much straight line speed because it doesn't have the same sort of peaky, fronty build that Mercedes has. And also it doesn't have the zero pod, which keeps the Mercedes really wrapped tightly. But my argument here today is that McLaren is beginning to wrap their car tightly around their suspension, especially with the narrow wheelbase and with their front suspension geometry. They're wrapping everything to maximize grip, to maximize stability and balance, whereas Mercedes is wrapping everything to maximize engine performance. And Mercedes probably has a slight advantage when it comes to the algorithm for dumping speed at the back. But what I'm going to argue is that with data, with upgrades, McLaren is beginning to close the gap with the deployment with their software, and they're going to have a tremendous advantage with ride quality, especially when we start to see street races like Miami and tracks which are bumpy, and races like street races like Monaco, because finally they've wrapped up their car properly to give it efficiency, aero efficiency, and also to bring out the most out of their suspension and balance. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you look closely at the upgrades that McLaren themselves are coming up with, they're borrowing this design concept of the wrap around the body closer to the narrower base, basically.
Yeah.
This gives them a lot more traction. It gives them suspension performance and overall stability. Basically, the way this works is that it improves how the air flows around the car, especially towards the floor and the diffuser. And the main sources of the floor and the diffuser are the main sources of downforce in modern F1. So there's better airflow efficiency. This increases the rear downforce, making the car more planted at medium and high speeds. Now, if you look at this is going to help the traction when the car is accelerating, especially when exiting fast corners, where you have some aerodynamic grip and stuff like that. So basically, with this kind of design, the tighter Coke bottle shape, that is rear body narrowing, helps to clean up airflow to the rear wing and diffuser and basically reduce turbulence. And when turbulence is reduced, it improves stability at the rear of the car. So I think it's a brilliant upgrade that's going to help their stability as well as their grip too, as they go into the next Formula One race.
Now, when you look at Mercedes also has a tight wrap, but everything is focused on maximizing as much as they can from the ICE and from the battery. Whereas McLaren is focusing more on, like we said, the wheelbase, which is narrower, which gives you a lot more balance and control, and also on their geometry, suspension. So that's where they're focusing how they sculpt the chassis and sculpt the body and make the chassis. And that's going to give them an advantage on, like you said, traction. And once you get an advantage in traction, you have less wheel spin, and that's going to cause less, clipping. Because the clipping, whenever you lose traction or wheel spin, then the algorithm goes straight to clipping and slows you down. So what this is going to actually do is make them more efficient, aside from because we know that there's deployment of energy from the algorithm. But when you're having that type of traction and everything, that gives you a kinetic advantage for harvesting energy and also for maintaining as much speed as you can without having clipping come into the brake. Because the clipping comes to make sure there's a balance between the 50-50 balance between the electric and the IC. But if you have that type of traction there, that's going to give you power with the MGUK, which goes around the idea. It's maximizing the power of the car, not just looking at the ICE or at the battery engine. You're actually getting power from a mechanical dynamic. What are your thoughts, Afolabi?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if you look at the way this thing is designed, the overall objective is to get the car, to generate more airflow around the car so that at least suspension geometry, whether it is anti-dive or anti-sport, works better when paired with the aero platform. Now, when the car remains flat under braking and acceleration, then it can work better in sync with the algorithm, and then the clipping thing is reduced. This keeps the floor operating in the optimal window. And the most important thing here, which I think might be an issue for McLaren, is the integration. Once they get the integration well, because I believe McLaren's integration is brilliant. Once the integration is brilliant, the bodywork, the floor design, and the cooling layout, as well as the suspension, will all work in sync. When all these are properly in line, then the result is that the car is more stable and more predictable. Usually when there's this kind of tweak, it's the integration that makes it to fail. But I trust McLaren that they will fuse this together.
Well, they've already started catching up because we know Mercedes has the advantage of integration on everybody. They have a totally integrated package in which engine, suspension, everything is integrated. But that's because they have the advantage in research because they're the ones who basically pioneered all this stuff during the hybrid. Okay, but what McLaren did was they were waiting to see how the car, this is how McLaren is, they're patient before they come up with a concept for the car. They allow real world activities and real world data and an abundance of data to build up to figure out which way to go conceptually. So the reason they don't have the integration is yet because they hadn't had the concept. You can't have a concept. You can't have integration unless you have a concept. So they let the first two races determine that. And then they started to make some adjustments on their car. They trimmed it down. Because they were having problems with a lag in the back because they weren't wrapped around the engine. So they trimmed it down, wrapped around the engine a little bit more, made it a little bit more compact. And now they're coming back with even more trimming again because they've decided what their concept is going to be. And when we think about the integration, it's not only the integration of the chassis and the body and the engine, it's also integrating everything with what your algorithm, the software too. So software is also
absolutely.
And the software mapping, all of that comes together as a unity. Now, we can argue that Mercedes engine-centric concept versus McLaren's, stability and suspension and balance concept.
And
grip. Yeah, we're not going to argue which one is better. I think McLaren's is better. But what's really important, though, is that McLaren is also going to have better integration because they are waiting to see results. So regardless of what your drive, if your focus is on engine or your focus is on grip, mechanical grip, that's all good and well. But the idea now is that who's going to have the better integration. And I'm going to say that McLaren has a wider window to even get better because they're more patient and did more data work, which is not to say anything bad about Mercedes. But Mercedes came out with its integrated unit at the beginning of the season, and there's not going to be any more improvements for them. No more upgrades. McLaren will keep on having upgrades. And we already saw in Japan, their straight line speed was improving, a sign of better integration, and also a sign of better deployment from the software. And we can continue, it was improving. Now, where I think the devastating effect is going to come is that once they finally get fully integrated, they're going to have better mechanical grip than Mercedes. And I still believe that that's the holy grail in Formula One. That's why they beat Red Bull. Red Bull was a faster car, peakier, had better aerodynamics, but McLaren had better ride quality and better grip, which is why they won the championship over Mercedes because of that stability. And I think that stability is going to either allow them to supplant Mercedes this year or probably by next year. And at the same time, with their methodology, their software and deployment will be just as good. I won't even say better, but it will be just as good as Mercedes. They're going to max out and figure out how to get their software and deployment strategy based on their car and their concept, which is about ride stability and mechanical grip. Give me my PhD, man. What's going on, Afalabi?
Absolutely. You're right about that. And I think right now we could even say that McLaren's chassis to power unit integration is by far, the best in the field. The only area where I still think Mercedes has an edge is they seem to have better thermal efficiency in the internal combustion engine. Better thermal efficiency.
And also better software. They still have better software.
And better software. But the gap and the margin is closing up because of McLaren's development. The gap and the margin
Ferrari
is
has
closing
good
up.
chassis too, but they don't have the same power of engine. And they have too many. I don't think they have a unified integration either because they rely too much on discrete things like winglets and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, they have too many gadgets. The Ferrari car has too many gadgets, and whenever you have a gadget, it fixes one thing but causes an imbalance on the other. So we'll wait to see. I think that in Miami, I'm going to make a prediction that it's going to be Ferrari. I mean, McLaren may very well have a winner because Piastri almost won in Japan. They're saying if he had pit stopped, he would have won. I still think he would have barely. I still think Antonelli would have beaten him, but he would have been by wouldn't have been by 13 seconds, it would have been by a second or two. But the fact that Piastri was driving so well shows you that they're catching up. And on this Miami track, and we all know that McLaren always brings their big uh, mechanical grip balance upgrade at the Miami race, and that's where they usually make a statement. They did it 2 years ago against Verstappen. I'm predicting they're going to do it again this in Miami. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you mentioned the Piastri brilliant execution against George Russell just before the safety car. What they are doing now, that is McLaren, is that they
Yeah,
have
and he actually beat Russell, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
But Antonelli beat Piastri. Yeah.
they have better control over their energy. And now sometimes they can afford to under-deploy and basically trick other cars as if they were struggling for energy. Basically, this can beat the other cars to, burn their battery, only for them to unleash full 50% electrical power, which was what Piastri actually did brilliantly against George Russell before the safety car. So I think they're really developing.
Yeah, and with the mechanical grip, what it does is it makes the car more efficient, so that there are not going to be fluctuations or imbalances between the 50-50 split. Because now you're getting a new source of power through that mechanical. It's a kinetic source of power, which is very important. So, and once again, which is why you'll see that they'll have less clipping than Mercedes. All right, Afolabi, take us out, man.
Yeah, it's been another brilliant show. We've been talking about how McLaren has improved their stability, as well as the upgrade that they have brought to bear, which is going to improve their airflow so well that it's going to, dovetail into their harvesting improvement and so many other things. I think we need to watch out for McLaren and particularly Oscar Piastri in Miami. And from Mustafa and myself, we'll be back again.
Now, wow, this one was real grandma.
It's an interesting theory. So when I was studying it this morning, it was really flowing.
No jokes involved in this one. Yeah. All right. Okay. So we're